Virtual reality is the future of entertainment, or so they said. As someone who loved new tech, I couldn't wait to get my hands on the latest VR headset. The advertisements promised an immersive experience like no other, a chance to step into another world and escape the mundanity of everyday life. What they didn't mention, though, was that sometimes those other worlds could be more terrifying than anything in reality. It all started when my friend Jake told me about this new game, Phantom Realms. According to him, it was unlike any VR game he'd ever played. So real, it was almost like stepping into a nightmare. Jake was a horror game enthusiast, and he assured me this was the scariest one yet. Intrigued, I decided to give it a try. I bought the game and set it up in my living room. The setup was simple enough. I connected the headset, calibrated the sensors, and adjusted the straps. As I placed the headset over my eyes, the real world disappeared, and I was transported to a dark, eerie forest. The graphics were stunningly realistic, and the sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls surrounded me. The game started with a brief tutorial, guiding me through basic movements and interactions. Once I got the hang of it, I ventured deeper into the forest. The atmosphere was thick with suspense, and I could feel my heart racing with anticipation. Little did I know, my journey was about to take a horrifying turn. As I walked through the forest, I noticed something strange. The trees seemed to be moving, not with the wind, but on their own. Shadows danced around me, and I could hear whispers, faint but unmistakable. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, reminding myself it was just a game, but the deeper I went, the more intense the fear became. Suddenly, a figure darted past me, just at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. The whispers grew louder, almost as if they were right next to me. I pressed on, determined to see what lay ahead. I came across an old, decrepit cabin in a clearing. The door creaked open as I approached, and a wave of cold air washed over me. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, filled with cobwebs and broken furniture. As I explored the rooms, I found a journal on a dusty table. The pages were filled with cryptic messages and unsettling drawings. One entry caught my eye. The shadows are watching. They know your fears and will use them against you. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the words. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. Just as I was about to leave, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. I could hear heavy footsteps approaching, accompanied by a low growl. Panic set in as I searched for an escape route, but there was none. The footsteps grew louder, and I could see a monstrous figure emerging from the darkness. I screamed and ripped off the headset, my heart racing and breath coming in ragged gasps. I was back in my living room, but the terror was still fresh in my mind. I decided to take a break and grab a drink, trying to calm my nerves. After a few minutes, I felt ready to dive back in, determined to face my fears. I put the headset back on and found myself in the cabin again, but this time, the atmosphere was even more oppressive. The whispers had returned, louder and more menacing. I could feel something watching me, its presence almost tangible. As I made my way out of the cabin, I encountered more strange occurrences. Shadows moved with a life of their own, and the environment seemed to shift around me. I came across a clearing with a stone altar in the center. The ground was covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with an otherworldly energy. I approached the altar and saw a mirror resting on top of it. As I looked into the mirror, my reflection twisted and contorted, turning into a grotesque version of myself. The whispers grew louder, now speaking directly to me. "You cannot escape," they hissed. "Now, we are always with you." Panic set in again, and I tried to pull away from the mirror, but my reflection reached out and grabbed me. I felt a cold, clammy hand around my wrist, and the world around me started to fade. I could feel myself being pulled into the mirror, the whispers growing louder and more frantic. I yanked off the headset, my heart pounding and sweat pouring down my face. This was more than just a game. It felt too real, too personal. I decided to call Jake and ask if he had experienced anything similar. "Hey, Jake, have you ever had any weird experiences with phantom realms?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake's voice was serious. "Yeah, man, that game is intense. I've had some creepy stuff happen, but that's what makes it so good, right?" "I don't know," I replied. "It feels like it's more than just a game. It's like it's inside my head." Jake laughed, but there was an edge to it. "That's just the immersive experience, dude. It's supposed to mess with your mind." I wasn't convinced, but I decided to give it one more try. Maybe I was just overreacting. I put the headset back on and braced myself for whatever came next. This time, I found myself in a dark, narrow hallway. The walls were lined with doors, each one slightly ajar. I could hear faint sounds coming from behind them, crying, whispering, and sometimes even screaming. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I passed one of the doors, it creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room. Inside, I saw a figure standing in the corner, facing the wall. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure turned slowly, revealing a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes. It stared at me for a moment before letting out a blood-curdling scream and charging towards me. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The figure reached out with skeletal hands, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I ripped off the headset, gasping for breath. The pain was gone, but the fear remained. This wasn't just a game. It was something much more sinister. I decided to stop playing and get rid of the game, but when I tried to delete it from my system, it wouldn't let me. Frustrated and scared, I decided to shut down the VR system and take a break. Maybe I just needed some time away from it to clear my head. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day, I woke up feeling groggy and disoriented. I decided to get out of the apartment and clear my head. I went for a walk in the park, hoping the fresh air would help. But even in the daylight, I couldn't escape the feeling of dread that had settled over me. When I returned home, I found a note on my kitchen table. It wasn't there when I left, and I lived alone. The note was written in a familiar handwriting, my own. It said, "You cannot escape. We are always with you." Panic set in, and I frantically searched the apartment for any signs of an intruder. There was no one there, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I decided to call the police and report the incident. They came and checked the apartment, but found no evidence of anyone else being there. The officers looked at me with a mix of concern and skepticism. "Are you sure you're not just imagining things?" one of them asked. I shook my head. "No, this is real. I don't know how, but it's real." They took my statement and left, but I could tell they didn't believe me. I felt alone and helpless, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences continued. Objects in my apartment moved on their own, and I heard whispers in the darkness. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, and I woke up each morning feeling more exhausted than the last. I felt like I was losing my mind, but the worst was yet to come. One morning, I found another note, this time on my bathroom mirror. It read, "If you want to get rid of us, you must continue the game, overcome the missions, and finish it, or we will finish with you." The message was clear and terrifying. I was trapped in a sinister game, and my only way out was through it. I stared at the note, my heart pounding. The idea of going back into the game filled me with dread, but I had no choice. I couldn't live like this, constantly on edge, never knowing what would happen next. I took a deep breath, gathered my resolve, and set up the VR system once more. As I put the headset on, I steeled myself for whatever horrors awaited me. The game loaded, and I found myself back in the dark, narrow hallway. The whispers were louder this time, more insistent. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Each door I passed seemed to hide a new terror, and I braced myself for what I would find. The first mission began when I entered a room at the end of the hallway. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit chamber with an old, ornate mirror in the center. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, and I could see my reflection twist and contort into a grotesque version of myself. "You must face your fears," a voice hissed. "Only then can you escape." I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the mirror. The reflection reached out and grabbed me, pulling me into a nightmarish vision. I was in a dark, endless void, surrounded by shadowy figures. They whispered my name, their voices filled with malice and hatred. "Face us," they demanded. "Face your fears." I closed my eyes, trying to gather my courage. I had to confront these shadows, these manifestations of my deepest fears. I opened my eyes and stared at them, refusing to look away. Slowly, the shadows began to fade, their whispers growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. I was back in the room with the mirror. The first mission was complete, but I knew there were more to come. The door to the next room opened, and I stepped through, ready to face whatever awaited me. The second mission took me to a dark forest, the same one I had first encountered in the game. The trees moved on their own, and the whispers were back, more sinister than ever. I had to find a way out of the forest, but the path was filled with traps and dangers. As I navigated the forest, I encountered shadowy figures that tried to stop me. They reached out with skeletal hands, their eyes filled with malice. I fought them off, using everything I had learned from the game. My heart raced, and I could feel the sweat pouring down my face, but I pressed on. Finally, I reached a clearing with a stone altar in the center. The ground was covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with an otherworldly energy. I approached the altar and saw a mirror resting on top of it. As I looked into the mirror, my reflection twisted and contorted, turning into a grotesque version of myself. The whispers grew louder, now speaking directly to me. "You cannot escape," they hissed. "We are always with you." Panic set in again, and I tried to pull away from the mirror, but again, as the first time, my reflection reached out and grabbed me. I felt a cold, clammy hand around my wrist. This time, instead of removing the headset, I forced myself to stay in the game, determined to finish it. The next mission began in a decrepit mansion, with creaking floors and shadows that seemed to move on their own. I had to solve puzzles and avoid traps, all while being pursued by a malevolent spirit that whispered my name. Each room in the mansion presented new horrors, figures darting out of sight, ghostly hands reaching for me, and blood-curdling screams that echoed through the halls. I fought my way through, my fear giving way to a desperate determination to finish the game and end this nightmare. Finally, I reached the final room. It was a large, dimly lit chamber with a grand staircase leading to a massive door. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that threatened to overwhelm me. As I climbed the stairs, I could feel the presence of the spirits closing in around me. At the top of the staircase, I found a note. It read, "To escape, you must face your greatest fear." I steeled myself and pushed open the door, stepping into a dark void. In the center of the void stood a figure, shrouded in darkness. As I approached, the figure stepped into the light, revealing my own face. "You cannot escape," my doppelganger said, its voice a distorted version of my own. "We are always with you." I felt a surge of panic, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to face this fear, whatever it was. I stepped forward, confronting the figure. It reached out and grabbed my hand, and I felt a jolt of electricity course through me. The world around me began to spin, and I felt myself being pulled back into the real world. I ripped off the headset, gasping for breath. I was back in my living room, but the oppressive feeling was gone. The whispers were silent, and the shadows no longer moved. I had done it. I had finished the game and escaped the nightmare. Over the next few days, I monitored my apartment closely, but there were no more strange occurrences. I felt a sense of relief and closure, knowing that I had faced my fears and emerged victorious. The experience left a lasting impact on me. I was more cautious about new technology and more mindful of the boundaries between reality and the digital world. I kept in touch with Jake, sharing my story and warning him about the dangers of phantom realms. In the end, I learned that some games are more than just entertainment. They can be gateways to our deepest fears, testing our courage and resilience. And while I had survived the ordeal, I knew that the memory of those dark nights would stay with me forever, a reminder of the thin line between reality and the unknown.